They tell you that silence is the absence of sound. They're wrong. In Antarctica, silence is a physical weight. It presses on your eardrums. It screams. My name is Jack Holloway. I am a structural engineer specializing in deep core drilling rigs. I have worked on oil platforms in the North Sea. I have worked in the diamond mines of Siberia. But nothing prepares you for the bottom of the world. We landed at McMurdo Station 3 days ago, but that wasn't my destination. My destination was a black dot on a map, 400 miles inland, a place that officially doesn't exist, Sector 9. I am recording this log because out here, if you don't hear your own voice, you start to forget you exist. The transport to the site took 6 hours in a snowcat. It's a tracked vehicle built like a tank. Inside, it smells of diesel fuel and old coffee. My driver was a man named Sven. He didn't talk much. He just chewed tobacco and stared at the GPS. Outside the window, there was nothing, just white. No horizon, no sky, just an endless swirling void of snow. It's hypnotic. If you look at it too long, your brain starts to hallucinate. You start seeing shapes in the storm, castles, towers, faces. I closed my eyes and listened to the engine. Thrum, thrum, thrum. It was the only thing anchoring me to reality. We were a tiny metal bubble floating in an ocean of ice. "We're here," Sven grunted. I looked out. At first, I saw nothing. Then a shape emerged from the whiteout. It looked like a dead beetle on a white sheet. Outpost Zero. It wasn't a modern research station. It was old. The metal was rusted, pitted by 50 years of ice storms. It looked like it had been built in the Cold War and forgotten. Massive antennas swayed in the wind, humming a mournful song. We didn't park. We docked. The snowcat connected directly to the station's airlock. I grabbed my duffel bag. "I'll be back in 2 weeks," Sven said. "Don't go outside without a tether. The wind here can pick you up and throw you a mile away before you hit the ground." The airlock hissed shut behind me. Clang. And then, silence.
I stepped into the decontamination room. The temperature difference hit me instantly. Outside, it was minus 60 degrees. Inside, it was a humid 65. I unzipped my parka. I took off my heavy boots. Thump, thump. The station was empty. The crew I was supposed to relieve, they weren't there to greet me. "Hello?" I called out. My voice echoed down the steel corridor. "Hello? Hello? Hello?" No answer, just the humming of the generators. I walked to the mess hall. There was a pot of coffee on the burner. It was burnt, boiled down to a black sludge. A half-finished game of chess sat on a table. It looked like they had just stepped out for a smoke break. But you don't take smoke breaks in Antarctica. I found the station commander's logbook on the desk in the comms room. I opened it to the last entry, dated 3 days ago. The handwriting was shaky, spiked. It read, "Depth 12,000 feet. We hit the cavity. The pressure readings are wrong. It's not a pocket of gas. It's an atmosphere." And below that, scrawled in heavy ink, "They are singing. Can't you hear them? They are singing from below." I looked at the radio. It was dead. The storm had scrambled the signal. I was alone. I walked to the window and looked out at the storm. Somewhere beneath my feet, miles down in the dark, something was waiting, and I had a job to do. I had to fix the drill.
To get to the drill, you have to go down. Sector 9 isn't built on the ice, it is built into it. I took the freight elevator. It's a cage of rusted steel descending into a shaft carved directly out of the glacier. Through the mesh walls, I watched the layers of ice pass by. White, then blue, then a deep, translucent black. Thousands of years of history compressed into strata. The temperature dropped. I could see my breath again. The elevator groaned and rattled, swaying slightly on its cable. We were going down 2 miles to the bedrock anchor point. It felt like descending into the throat of a sleeping giant. The doors opened onto the drill hall. It was immense, a cathedral of engineering buried under the world. Imagine a hangar big enough to hold a 747, carved out of rock and ice. In the center stood the rig. It was a monster, 5 stories tall, a complex skeleton of hydraulic pistons, titanium gears, and coolant pipes. It was silent now, dormant, but the smell, it didn't smell like machine oil. It smelled like ozone, like a thunderstorm. Floodlights illuminated the rig, casting long, spider-like shadows on the rock walls. I walked towards it. My boots echoed on the metal grating. Clang, clang, clang. I felt insignificant standing next to it, a flea on a steel beast. I reached the platform at the base of the rig. There it was, the borehole, a perfect circle 3 feet wide, vanishing into the darkness of the floor. The laser depth gauge on the console was flashing red. Depth 14,000 FT. Error, sensor failure. They had drilled deeper than anyone in history, deeper than the Russians at Kola. I leaned over the railing to look into the hole. I expected to feel heat rising up from the mantle, but instead, I felt a breeze, a warm, moist breeze carrying the scent of wet earth and ferns. It was impossible. We were in the middle of a frozen desert, but the air coming from below smelled like a greenhouse.
And then I heard it. The singing. It wasn't voices, it was the wind passing through the miles of pipe, creating a resonance frequency. Hoo, hum, hoo. But it sounded like a choir, a deep baritone choir chanting in the dark. I understood why the previous crew was spooked. If you stood here long enough in the dark, you would start to think the earth was talking to you. I checked the tension cables. They were slack. The drill head wasn't resting on rock. It was hanging in free space. They had punched through the crust. Into what? A cavern? A pocket? The logbook said atmosphere. I grabbed a flare from the emergency kit. I needed to see. I cracked the flare. It hissed into life, sputtering red sparks. I dropped it into the hole. I watched it fall. Down, down, down. It became a red star, getting smaller and smaller. It didn't hit the sides. It didn't hit water. I counted the seconds. 10, 20, 30. Usually you see it stop. You see it hit the bottom. But the light didn't stop. It just faded. It vanished into the depth, swallowed by the distance. The hole didn't have a bottom. Or if it did, it was so far down that light couldn't reach it back. I stepped back from the edge. My hands were sweating inside my gloves. Whatever was down there, it was vast, and the drill string was still connected to it.
I followed the cables. The main drill string wasn't the only line going down. Hidden behind a maintenance bulkhead, I found a secondary winch, massive, reinforced. It wasn't holding a drill bit. It was holding a vessel. We called them diving bells in the North Sea, but this was something else. It was a sphere made of titanium and quartz glass, about 8 feet wide. Painted on the side in faded yellow stencil was a name, Icarus 1. It wasn't designed for water pressure. It was designed for atmospheric entry. The logbook was right. They didn't just drill a hole to look. They drilled a hole to visit. I knew I shouldn't. My rational brain screamed no, but curiosity is a gravity of its own. I climbed inside. The interior was cramped. 1 seat,
a dashboard of analog dials, a joystick. It smelled of canned oxygen and leather. I sealed the hatch. Clunk. Hiss. Suddenly, the roar of the drill hall vanished. Silence returned, but this was a safe silence. I felt like a pilot in a cockpit. I strapped myself in. I flipped the power switches. Click, click, click. Amber lights flickered to life on the dashboard. Oxygen, 98%. Battery, full. Comms, offline. I put my hand on the winch control lever. Going down, I whispered, to no one. I engaged the winch. The floor beneath me opened. The Icarus dropped, smoothly, slowly. I passed the concrete foundations of the station, then the blue ice, then the rock. I was in the pipe now. The only light came from the exterior floodlights mounted on the capsule. They illuminated the rock walls rushing past upwards. Whirr! The sound of the cable was hypnotic, a long, continuous drone. I watched the depth gauge, 2,000 feet, 5,000 feet, 10,000 feet. I was falling towards the center of the earth in a metal bubble. Time seemed to lose its meaning. It was just me and the rock.
14,000 feet. The rock walls suddenly ended. One moment I was in a tunnel. The next, I was in the void. The capsule swung slightly as it exited the borehole. I was hanging in free space. I gripped the armrests. I turned the exterior spotlights down. I expected to see darkness. I expected to see the bottom of a cave. But I didn't see darkness. I saw twilight. A soft, diffuse, bioluminescent glow filled the air. It was a pale green like the northern lights, but it was everywhere. It wasn't coming from above. It was coming from below. I descended further. I passed through a layer of thick mist. Clouds, real clouds floating miles underground. And then the mist cleared. I pressed my face against the glass. My breath fogged the viewport, but I wiped it away. I saw it. Far below me, stretching as far as the eye could see, was land. Not ice, not rock. Green. Ferns the size of redwood trees. Rivers that glowed with blue light. Waterfalls cascading from the ceiling of the cavern into a massive subterranean ocean. It was a lost world, a garden preserved in amber. Sector 9, I breathed. It's real.
The winch stopped. I was hanging about 200 feet above the canopy. The Icarus swayed gently on its cable, back and forth, back and forth. It was hypnotic. I turned off the exterior floodlights. I didn't need them anymore. The light down here was sufficient. It was a soft, perpetual twilight. It didn't come from a sun. It came from the ceiling of the cavern, miles above. Massive clusters of crystals caught the geothermal energy and glowed like distant constellations. It was beautiful. Below me lay a forest of impossible scale. Ferns as tall as skyscrapers, mushrooms the size of houses. The colors weren't just green, they were violet, indigo, and pale blue. It looked like a coral reef, but made of trees. I checked the external sensors. Oxygen, 24%. Nitrogen, 70%. Argon, 1%. The air was richer than on the surface, hyperoxygenated. It explained how things grew so big. Outside the glass, the air was filled with floating particles. Seeds? Spores? Dust? They drifted lazily in the updrafts, glowing faintly. When they hit the glass of the viewport, they chimed softly. It was a world of eternal growth. I thought about the ice storm raging 4 miles above my head, the cold, the death, and here, in the womb of the planet, life was exploding. It felt like finding a secret room in a house you've lived in forever. To my left, a river cut through the jungle. It wasn't water as I knew it. It was thick, moving slowly like molten glass, and it glowed, a bright electric blue current winding through the dark trees. It flowed towards the center of the cavern, where a massive lake
An inland sea reflected the crystal ceiling. I watched the water move. It was calming, a vein of light pumping life into this dark place. I wondered what swam in those depths. Blind fish? Leviathans? The water looked warm, inviting. Then, movement caught my eye. Down in the clearing, something was moving through the ferns. It was huge. At first, I thought it was a rock formation. Then, it took a step. Thud. Even up here, I felt the vibration. It was a quadruped, massive. It looked like a cross between a woolly mammoth and a turtle. It had thick, shaggy fur covered in moss and a shell-like armor on its back. It moved slowly, deliberately. It wasn't hunting, it was grazing. It used a long trunk to pull down a glowing blue fruit from a tree. It ate with slow, rhythmic chews. It ignored the capsule hanging above it. To this creature, I was just another spore in the wind. It was peaceful, a king of its own world. I sat there for an hour, just watching the beast eat. My eyelids felt heavy. The sway of the capsule was rocking me to sleep. But then, the radio on the dashboard crackled. Karsh! I jumped. The comms were supposed to be dead. The cable didn't carry signals this deep. Karsh! Beep, beep, beep. It wasn't static. It was a rhythmic pulse. I looked at the signal strength meter. It wasn't coming from the station above. It was coming from the ground. From the ground. I grabbed the binoculars and looked where the signal was pointing. There, half buried in the vines and giant roots, was something artificial, a structure. It wasn't human. It was smooth, black stone, a pyramid, and there was a light on inside.
I pushed the lever forward. The Icarus descended the final 50 feet. It didn't land with a crash. The ground down here was soft. Thick layers of moss and decayed matter cushioned the landing. The capsule groaned as the cable went slack. I was down. I sat there for a moment, listening. The vibration of the winch motor stopped. The only sound was the cooling of the capsule's hull, ticking as the metal adjusted to the warmth outside. Tick, tick, tick. I looked at the thermometer. 72 degrees Fahrenheit. 4 miles above, my snowcat was frozen solid. Here, it was a summer evening. I decided to go out. I didn't need the heavy oxygen suit. The sensors were green across the board. I put on a lightweight rebreather mask, just in case there were pathogens, and grabbed my field kit. I spun the wheel on the hatch. It was heavy, solid steel. Creak. The door swung open. The air hit me instantly. It was heavy, humid, and rich. It smelled of wet soil, ozone, and crushed flowers. It was the smell of a greenhouse, magnified 1,000 times. I took a breath. It tasted sweet. I stepped onto the ladder and climbed down. Walking was difficult. The gravity felt the same, but the terrain was alien. The moss was a foot deep, like walking on a memory foam mattress. I pushed through ferns that were taller than me. Their leaves were translucent, glowing with faint veins of purple light. When I brushed against them, they curled up, reacting to my touch. Rustle. Shh. I felt watched, not by a predator, but by the forest itself. Insects, or things like insects, floated around me. They looked like dragonflies made of glass. I wasn't afraid. The atmosphere was too peaceful for fear. It felt like walking through a cathedral.
I reached the clearing. The structure loomed ahead. Up close, it was even more impressive. It wasn't built from blocks. It was a single, seamless piece of black stone, or metal. It absorbed the light. It was the darkest thing in the cavern. It was a pyramid, about 3 stories high with a flat top. There were no carvings, no hieroglyphs, just a perfectly smooth surface that felt cold to the touch. I placed my hand on it. It vibrated, a low, rhythmic pulse. Thrum, thrum. It felt like putting your hand on the chest of a sleeping animal. It was alive, or powered. I walked around the base until I found the entrance. It wasn't a door, it was an opening, a triangular slit in the darkness. Warm amber light spilled out from inside. I stood at the threshold. The air inside was drier, cleaner. I checked my radiation counter. Normal. I checked the signal tracker. The beep was rapid now. Beep, beep, beep. Whatever was broadcasting was just inside. "Hello?" I called out again. My voice didn't echo. The walls seemed to absorb the sound. I took a deep breath of the humid air, gripped my flashlight, and stepped inside. I was the first human to enter this place in maybe forever.
I stepped inside. The silence was absolute. It felt heavy, like a blanket. I was standing in a vast triangular hallway. The ceiling tapered up into darkness 50 feet above my head. The walls were made of the same black stone, but they were lined with veins of gold, real gold. It wasn't decoration, it was circuitry. The amber light I had seen from outside was coming from the walls themselves. They pulsed gently, illuminating the dust motes dancing in the air. It didn't feel like a tomb. It felt like a server room or a library. The air was dry and smelled of old paper and ozone. I walked down the center of the hall. I felt small, not afraid, just young. This place was built when my ancestors were still learning to make fire. The hallway opened into a central chamber. It was circular. In the center, rising from the floor, were hundreds of pillars. They weren't stone, they were crystal. Quartz? Diamond? I couldn't tell. They were hexagonal, glowing with a soft inner blue light. They were arranged in concentric circles, like trees in a forest. I approached the nearest one. It was humming. I realized these weren't structural supports. They were storage devices, data crystals. Imagine the Library of Congress condensed into a forest of glass. I reached out to touch one. My glove brushed the smooth surface. A spark jumped from the crystal to my hand. It didn't hurt. It felt like a handshake. In the center of the room stood a pedestal. The signal, the one my radio had picked up, was coming from here. A console. It had no buttons, no keyboard, just a depression in the stone in the shape of a hand with 5 fingers, just like mine. They weren't aliens, they were us, or cousins of us. I hesitated. Touching this could trigger a defense system, or it could turn off the lights. But the rhythm of the signal was inviting. It was a beacon saying, "Read me." I took off my glove. I placed my bare hand into the depression. The stone was warm. The room suddenly darkened. The amber lights faded.
Then the air above the pedestal exploded into light. A hologram. It filled the room, swirling around me. It was a map of the Earth, but the continents were wrong. Africa and South America were closer together. Antarctica wasn't at the bottom of the world. It was tropical, green, teeming with life. I watched the timeline move forward. I saw the ice coming, a massive white sheet creeping down from the poles. I saw the cities on the surface burning, then freezing. I saw the people moving underground, building the pyramids, sealing the entrances. They didn't die out. They hid. They went deep where the planet's core kept them warm. This wasn't a tomb. It was a time capsule, left for us to find when we were ready to look down instead of up. The hologram changed. It showed a face, a human face, but perfect, symmetrical. Eyes slightly larger, skin slightly gray. It looked at me. It spoke. I couldn't understand the words. It was a language of clicks and vowels, musical and complex, but I understood the intent. It was a greeting. "Welcome back," it seemed to say. "We have been waiting." The recording looped. The face faded, replaced by the map of the tunnels. Sector 9 wasn't the only entrance. There were dozens. In Tibet, in the Amazon, in Siberia. The world beneath our feet was a honeycomb, and we were just the tenants living on the roof.
I left the library. My head was spinning with the images I had seen, the maps, the history. But a map is one thing, reality is another. I walked back through the glowing ferns. The path led upwards towards a ridge of volcanic rock that overlooked the central lake. I needed to see it. I climbed. The moss was soft under my boots. Step, step, breath. The air grew cooler as I ascended. A gentle breeze brushed my face, carrying a new scent. Not jungle anymore, but ozone, clean energy, and salt. I reached the top of the ridge. I looked out over the subterranean sea, and I stopped breathing. Across the black water, rising from the center of the lake, was an island, and on the island stood a city. It wasn't built of stone or steel. It looked like it was grown from crystal and light. Spires of translucent glass pierced the cavern air kilometers high. Bridges made of pure energy connected the towers. It glowed with a soft, pulsing blue and white light. It reflected perfectly in the still water below, creating a double city, one reaching for the ceiling, one reaching for the depths. It was Atlantis. It was Shangri-La. It was real. I watched the city for a long time. It was alive. I saw lights moving between the spires. Vehicles, ships. They didn't use rockets or propellers. They floated silently, gliding on magnetic currents. They looked like silver teardrops. There was no smog, no traffic noise, no chaos, just a perfectly choreographed dance of light. It made our cities on the surface, New York, Tokyo, London, look like anthills, noisy, dirty, primitive anthills. Here, they had solved the problem of living. They existed in perfect balance with their world. I raised my binoculars. I tried to see the inhabitants. I saw figures walking on the glass bridges, small dots of white. They moved slowly, deliberately. They weren't marching, they were walking, maybe talking. Did they know I was here? Did they know a primitive man from the freezing surface was watching them from the bushes? Probably. With technology like this, they probably knew I was coming the moment I drilled the hole. But they didn't send jets. They didn't send guards. They let me look, like a parent letting a child peek into the living room during a dinner party. I sat on the rock and watched the city of glass until the night cycle began. The crystals in the ceiling dimmed. The lights in the city turned to a warm gold. It was time to go back.
I looked at the Icarus capsule down in the clearing. I could stay here. I could walk down to the shore and wait for a ship. I could leave the cold, the wars, the taxes, the noise of the surface world behind forever. It was tempting. God, it was tempting. But I knew I didn't belong here. I was a guest, an intruder, and I had a promise to keep. I had to tell the world that we aren't alone, that we have a family living in the basement. I stood up. "Thank you," I whispered to the city of glass. I turned back towards the jungle.
I climbed back into the Icarus. My boots left muddy prints on the metal floor. Green mud. Alien mud. I sealed the hatch. Clang. Hiss. I sat in the pilot's seat and strapped in. I took one last look through the viewport. The glowing ferns, the black pyramid, the distant city of glass shimmering on the lake. I wanted to memorize it. Every photon of light, every shade of blue. "Goodbye," I whispered. I engaged the winch. Click. Whirr. The capsule jerked slightly, then lifted off the soft ground. The ferns brushed against the hull, waving farewell. Swish. Swish. We rose. 10 feet. 50 feet. 200 feet. The city became a toy, then a jewel, then a star. We passed through the cloud layer. The mist enveloped the capsule again. Thick, swirling white fog. For a moment I was blind. Then we broke through the top of the mist. I looked up. The borehole was waiting for me in the ceiling of the cavern. A perfectly round circle of absolute darkness. It looked like the pupil of an eye. We drifted towards it, leaving the light behind, heading back to the rock. We entered the pipe. The light from below was cut off instantly. I was back in the throat of the world. I turned on the instrument panel. The soft amber glow was my only company. Depth, 13,000 feet. 12,000 feet. The ascent was slower than the descent. Gravity was fighting us now. I leaned back in the seat and closed my eyes. The vibration of the chair traveled through my spine. Hum. It was a lullaby. I didn't think about the report I had to write. I didn't think about the CIA or the scientists. I just drifted in the dark, suspended between two worlds. I climbed back into the Icarus. My boots left muddy prints on the metal floor. Green mud. Alien mud. I sealed the hatch. Clang. Hiss. I sat in the pilot's seat and strapped in. I took one last look through the viewport. The glowing ferns, the black pyramid, the distant city of glass shimmering on the lake. I wanted to memorize it. Every photon of light, every shade of blue. "Goodbye," I whispered. I engaged the winch. Click. Whirr. The capsule jerked slightly, then lifted off the soft ground. The ferns brushed against the hull, waving farewell. Swish.
Swish. We rose. 10 feet, 50 feet, 200 feet. The city became a toy, then a jewel, then a star. We passed through the cloud layer. The mist enveloped the capsule again. Thick, swirling white fog. For a moment I was blind. Then we broke through the top of the mist. I looked up. The borehole was waiting for me in the ceiling of the cavern. A perfectly round circle of absolute darkness. It looked like the pupil of an eye. We drifted towards it, leaving the light behind, heading back to the rock. We entered the pipe. The light from below was cut off instantly. I was back in the throat of the world. I turned on the instrument panel. The soft amber glow was my only company. Depth, 13,000 feet, 12,000 feet. The ascent was slower than the descent. Gravity was fighting us now. I leaned back in the seat and closed my eyes. The vibration of the chair traveled through my spine. Hum. It was a lullaby. I didn't think about the report I had to write. I didn't think about the CIA or the scientists. I just drifted in the dark, suspended between two worlds.
I stepped out of the capsule. The air in the drill hall was freezing. It bit my exposed skin. I zipped my parka all the way up. I walked to the main control console. The screens were flickering, waiting for input. Drill status, idle. Recording complete. I looked at the data drive in my hand. It contained everything. The video of the city, the audio of the choir, the biological scans of the ferns. It was the greatest scientific discovery in human history. It would make me famous. It would change the world. And that was exactly why I couldn't keep it. I sat down. I didn't copy the files. I opened the root directory. I typed in the command, format drive C/overwrite. The computer asked, "Are you sure?" I thought about the city of glass. I thought about the peace I felt down there. "Yes," I whispered. I pressed enter. A loading bar appeared, deleting. Then I opened the drill logs. I altered the sensor data. I changed the depth readings. I made it look like the drill had hit a pocket of magma at 15,000 feet. Equipment failure, sensor melt, impossible to proceed. I turned the discovery into a disappointment. It was a lie, but it was a necessary lie. There was one last thing to do. I couldn't leave the winch operational. Someone else might find the Icarus. I took a welding torch from the maintenance rack. I walked to the winch gears. I lit the torch. Whoosh! The blue flame hissed in the cold air. I welded the gears together. I fused the release lever to the console. I made sure that the Icarus would never fly again. It was sealed in its dock forever. Sparks flew, illuminating the dark hangar like fireworks. It was vandalism, but to me, it felt like locking the gate to the Garden of Eden. I reached into my pocket. I pulled out a small piece of moss I had taken from the landing site. It was still glowing faintly green. It was slowly dying in the cold air. I walked to the edge of the borehole. I held it over the darkness. "Go home," I said. I let it go. I didn't hear it hit the bottom. It drifted down into the warm updraft, returning to the world where it belonged. I replaced the heavy steel cover over the hole. Clang! I spun the locking wheel until my muscles burned. Sealed. I walked back to the living quarters. The station felt different now. It wasn't just abandoned. It was a tomb for a secret. I packed my bag. I sat at the radio. I changed the frequency to the McMurdo emergency channel. "Mayday, Mayday," I said calmly. "This is Engineer Halloway at Outpost Zero. Massive equipment failure, structural instability, requesting immediate extraction." I waited. Static. Then a voice cut through the snow. "Copy, Halloway. Extraction team is inbound. ETA 4 hours." I leaned back in the chair. I closed my eyes. I was going back to the world of noise, but I would always carry the silence with me.
That was 30 years ago. I never went back to the ice. I live in a cabin now, up in the mountains of Montana. It's warm here in the summer. The soil is rich and dark. I sit by the fire most nights. The cold gets into my bones easier these days. Sometimes when the house is quiet, I close my eyes and I can still hear the wind howling around Outpost Zero. But mostly, I hear the other sound, the singing, the choir of the deep earth. The official report called it a catastrophic geothermal anomaly. They said the drill hit an unstable pocket of pressurized magma. The project was scrapped. The station was abandoned to the ice. Nobody questioned it. Nobody wanted to believe that billions of dollars had been wasted on a hole to nowhere. I got a medal for bravery in a crisis and a quiet retirement package. They paid me to forget. I took their money, and I kept their secret. Not to protect them, but to protect what is down there. Sometimes I walk out into my garden at night. I take off my shoes. I stand barefoot on the grass. I feel the dirt between my toes. People look up at the stars and wonder if we are alone. They build telescopes to look for life billions of miles away. I don't look up anymore. I look down. I know that just a few thousand miles beneath my feet, there is another sun glowing in a crystal sky. There are forests untouched by man. There are cities of glass that have never known war. We are walking on the roof of a cathedral.
Some nights I worry that someone else will find them. Technology gets better. The ice is melting. But then I remember the size of that place, the vast, silent emptiness surrounding the garden. They are safe. They are waiting for us to grow up, to stop fighting, to be ready to see the truth without wanting to destroy it. Until then, I am the keeper of the secret, the man who saw paradise and closed the door. So don't worry about the world tonight. It is older than you know and stronger than you think. Put your head on the pillow. Listen to the silence. It's not empty. It's full of life. The world is deep, and you are safe. Sleep well,